In the early days, way back when, utilities we were relying on manual meter readings, obviously, and this was really in response to customers wanting more information about their service delivery, some claiming that the bills were too high, just wanting to know a little bit more. And obviously this was very, very labor intensive, with workers going door to door each month, recording consumption manually. This was time consuming, as I said, but it also meant we only got a single data point each billing cycle, just one snapshot of usage over an entire month. Which, evolved into AMR, automated meter reading. And that changed the game a little bit by allowing meters to send readings remotely through modern communications at the time. It cut down on the manual labor, of course, brought some efficiency to the proceedings, but, it still provided pretty limited data, often just a few readings each day. We got like a rough outline of the consumption of our consumers. Smart meters then entered the market, AMI, of course, advanced metering infrastructure, and that really allowed and introduced that bidirectional communication between the utilities and their customers, capturing data in shorter intervals, typically every 15 minutes or so. This was, like I said, a leap forward, a continued leap forward in the technology evolution, and this gave us a little bit more insight into real-time usage patterns, improving some outage detection abilities and response times. But now we're here to talk about, this is really, those were all significant technology shifts, over the life of metering. But we're in overdrive now with what we're seeing with next generation meters. These are meters that have edge computing capabilities. They're capable of processing data directly and communicating with devices behind the meter, which you're seeing in some of the Innovation Zone PlugFest demos, like smart thermostats or EV chargers, of course. And the meters that are going under glass here on the side of our customers' residents as part of Next Gen AMI, they've really got unprecedented computing power and the data granularity, the likes of which we've never seen. There's tens of millions of more data, being consumed and potentially sent across networks with this technology. So we're not really limited to just reading consumption. We're now trying to use this to actively potentially manage and optimize the grid in real time. So that's what's at stake. That's what we're talking about, and you'll get to meet these fine gentlemen next and hear about where they're at on their journey. So thank you again for this time. We're going to try to save some time at the end for questions. So I'll cue you up at about 10 minutes before, based on how the conversation's flown. And again, the microphone's over here on this side of the stage when the time comes. So I'm going to first start, because we haven't done introductions yet. Going through with each one of you, I wanted you everyone in the audience to get to know who you are, what role you play within your utility, and just give them a tease of kind of where your utility is on the AMI journey to date, because we're going to get into some details about some use cases and the communication. So I'll start with Mo.
Hey everyone, oh, this is quite loud and it is quite bright. Mo Al-Ahmar, I'm with Southern California Edison, and I'm leading the entire AMI 2.0 effort at Edison currently. We're in the proof of concept phase right now. So right now we have our lab set up, and we are ingesting products into our lab and kind of testing those in earnest, right, to see if they have the capabilities that we want as a utility, right, which we'll get into in a few moments.
That's right. Thank you. Ron, why don't you go next?
Ron Brady. I'm a senior network architect with Xcel Energy. One of my main focuses now is PLTE, but I have supported the FAN, our field area networks, and I was a part of the WiMAX deployment, and as you all know, that didn't live that long after the FCC made some critical changes. So we have gotten to really learn how to utilize AMI mesh networks to their fullest, to aggregate communications and work really, really hard to make them as efficient as possible.
Thanks, Ron. John?
Thanks. Yeah, John Sala. I'm in the IT department at Duquesne Light. We're based out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I've got responsibility for kind of a convergence of things, so I'm covering both our PLT investigation. We're currently in the middle of an engagement with Burns and McDonnell, doing a 12-week assessment. I jokingly say pushing that rope for 2 years, but now we actually have some horsepower behind it. So we're working our way through that, and we're also just beginning our AMI 2.0 evaluation. We'll talk a little bit more about it as we get along. We're doing an IIJA-funded pilot that we've kicked off maybe about 5-6 months ago, and we're kind of in the thick of that. So that's what I'm involved with.
Thanks, fellas. So let's kind of push in a little bit on functional requirements and some of the use cases. And I'll start with you, Ron. I mean, you mentioned you guys have, I mean, in our pre-talk, we have thousands of meters on mesh right now. So millions of meters. Okay, sorry about that. I must have missed a couple zeros on my notes, but yeah, you've got that experience, and now you're thinking about next generation AMI 2.0. So if you wouldn't mind, talk to the audience a little bit about what functional requirements you're building, what type of opportunities are you looking at to utilize the next-gen AMI network?
So currently, we have most of our electric meters are on the Itron mesh. And the reason for the Itron mesh is, regardless of what type of wireless network that you build, inside of these neighborhoods, in order to gain efficiency, you really need to aggregate. That's one of our favorite words in telecommunications. We like to aggregate everything, right? We like to take those little bitty bits of data and we like to compile that all into one big bucket that can be transported efficiently. So essentially what's happened is that we have taken this, we took this idea of a self-healing mesh and we deployed that, and we did it in such an efficient manner that we've been able to maintain a reliability of like 99.8% available, reliable, and that in and of itself is pretty impressive. And when you talk about that kind of reliability, that sounds really good, but the question is how sustainable is that? So what we have found is this mesh heals so well that you just about can't take it down. It takes just about anything you throw at it, and it stays up. No matter how many failures you have, it just keeps on passing that traffic along. It just makes it the right choice. And whenever you're talking about a large group of small devices that are sitting out there on the edge, and it provides such a great path of aggregation that, you know, it has allowed us to be a lot more efficient in terms of how we pull that data, and where, you know, it provides more information, a lot more background. So today, you know, we're looking at newer areas to expand that potentially, and to see what's going to happen with AMI 2.0. That's something that we feel like that we can migrate to very easily because we're ready to go there. We can go from a 2 meg edge pipe to something much larger than that as we start to aggregate higher.
Gotcha. We'll come back to the communications aspects. I did want to push a little bit further on. Can you talk a little bit about maybe the different requirements or different use cases, if there are, between the electric network and your gas network considerations?
Yeah, well, so today our gas network doesn't have a mesh. It would be, we're also deploying private LTE, and the idea is that there's not going to be a mesh, there's not going to be an aggregation point that it'll ride the LTE network. So, but you still have to ask the question, that's a lot of devices. You're talking millions and millions of devices. At some point you get to a subscriber saturation on your PLTE network. So how do you manage that efficiently? So today you would have a use case for gas meters, you'd have a use case for on the electric side, not just for the meters, but also those things that are behind the meter, also EV charging, all of those things create different aggregation points. They have to be addressed. Otherwise, there's no network you're going to build that's going to be robust enough to bring all of those bits of information back efficiently. So we have a lot of use cases. They come out more and more every day. So we're more concerned now about capacity for each of these networks and how we can leverage AMI and PLTE together. Because today what we would do is we would aggregate them to an access point and then use PLTE as a middle mile transport medium to pull that back. But if you if you don't have a way to aggregate that, you can't do that efficiently, right? So your use cases will be endless. You just have to figure out a way to capture that and bring that together in one bucket so that it can be transported efficiently. And we think AMI 2.0 is probably the best way to do that.
Awesome. I'm gonna ask John a similar question. You've got, historically we talked about, AMI been used for primarily around billing, and as you're, navigating your private LTE decision and this IIJA funding, like what are some of the use cases that you've talked about at DLC that are driving this decision?
Yeah, sure. And, one begets the other in our case. We are in about year 10 of our second fixed network system. We had an AMR fixed network system in the late 90s. We replaced that starting in 2014. So in a normal AMI life cycle, we would be maybe 3 years out from really starting to look at the planning for the next gen, just on equipment obsolescence and depreciation. But what has happened in the meantime is, everybody's probably familiar with the IIJA funding opportunities. We were lucky, I say in quotes, enough to win an award under the kind of phase 1 level for improving our grid resiliency. It started out as really an operations-driven engagement, kind of outside of the metering, but it quickly became apparent after they started looking at, we're going to deploy this in kind of a secondary form factor like a meter collar, et cetera. It's very passive. It can be interjected into the system to do a number of use cases, right? So a lot of this is around data analytics, grid edge intelligence, trying to tease out the patterns and be able then to build holistic solutions around that to find a whole myriad of problems, right? But it was a much more exploratory, but it became apparent that those two things, that the operational needs, were going to just run headlong into an AMI upgrade cycle. And certain folks within the utility are like, that's just not going to work. We're not going to be able to deploy multiple technologies out at the end. So we pivoted and kind of accelerated our investigation of AMI and moved that technology to be under the glass, so to speak. And so now we're pivoting into that stage where we're working to essentially do all of this under the glass, and that's where we kind of, one begets the other. We quickly learned, and that's where the testing and trying comes out, we learned this stuff produces a lot of data. And if it hasn't been apparent yet this week in talking to folks, I'm here to tell you, it produces a lot of data. And we were like, this is gonna need substantial backhaul capability. And I was already on the cusp, even in the early days, of thinking like, really like a fat pipe. I understand grid edge communications, peer-to-peer, PLC, all that, but I think the investment in this technology is, a 15+ year investment. It's really hard to predict where you're gonna be, 2-3 years from now, let alone 5, 10, 15 years. So trying to, and I hate to use the word, but I'm gonna use it, future-proof. You try to do everything you can. So that's kind of how we ended up at me carrying forward a PLT investigation, and so now it's kind of a chicken and the egg. Is PLT gonna win the day to be a precursor to AMI, or vice versa? It's gonna kind of take time to figure that all out.
Appreciate that. I know someone who likes data. Mo, let's talk about some of the how you're leaning into all the testing and the use cases, and how you're gonna plan to use the data from these next gen meters as part of your use case and development of this product.
Yeah, I want to take a step back for a second and just talk about some of the capabilities at a high level that Southern California Edison is looking at. For us, the way I would bucketize sort of the capabilities, interoperability is really big for us right now. We don't want vendor lock-in, right? So I see a world where we have multiple vendors out there, multiple grid technologies that are all talking to each other, right? That's one piece. Another one is DER management. We're in the state of California, and DERs are cropping up all over the place. We need a way to measure them. We think the meter is a sound way to measure a lot of what's happening with DERs, right? So that's another big category that I think we cannot ignore as a capability. The third one is what you mentioned, John, is advanced analytics. I think AMI 2.0, Next Gen AMI, whatever we're calling it, at Edison we're calling it Customer Grid Edge. So there are a variety of names for this program, but it's all predicated on real-time data. And someone mentioned fat pipes. We need fat pipes to bring all this data back. But advanced analytics and developing applications based on all that real-time data that we're going to get is really, really important. And so there are tons of uses. If you think about the customer and you think about grid operators, what do you all want on an application coming to your phone? Do you want real-time notifications to tell you when you're out of power, to tell you how much you owe on your bill? So these are the types of things that we're looking at from an advanced analytics perspective. And on the flip side, we're, grid operators, it's really giving them the tools they need to flex load downstream, right? And that prevents a lot of capital development upstream, if you will. So there's a benefit there. And then situational awareness, outage notifications, outage management. If we're getting real-time data and we have, sort of waveform data coming back to us at a rapid clip, we can realize and give people an understanding around what's happening out on the grid, anomaly detection, give customers that information, the whole bit, right? So I think we're at an inflection point. I've been telling people as I walk around here the last couple of days, I think utilities are turning into tech companies, and we're going to kind of have to with all the data coming at us. If we're not thinking about that, then we need to ASAP, and we also need a solid data strategy, right? And so it's a very exciting world to be in.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. I'm sure it sounds like a lot of folks are asking you about that. If you don't mind, if you're willing to, can you talk a little bit about the testing and the functionality? I know you talked about vendors, so any meter vendors, your big point of the way you're testing, correct me if I'm wrong, is, like you said, interoperability is going to be, you don't want to be locked in, you want to mitigate some supply chain issues. Right. A little bit better for future-proofing as things change and evolve. So how are you going about that? And maybe talk a little bit about the test environment, just so other utilities can maybe learn a little bit.
Yeah, the way we have it set up right now is it's like a tiny home, basically, right? Or a tiny business. And it's sort of like a neighborhood, I guess you can call it, in our lab right now. So we have a smart home, and we have microwaves and washing machines and things like that, just to give you an idea of how it's set up. And vendors are giving us test cases, and we have engineers, two of whom are right here in front of me, are developing test cases as well. And so we have a whole test case list that we're going to go through, and we're going to rigorously test a lot of the capabilities that we want. When we first started, we had about 120 use cases for the next-gen meter. We're now down to about 33 foundational use cases that we can build on top of. So the categories that I mentioned, if you double-click into them, each one of them has, a smattering of use cases. And so we're going to test each one of those, right, ad nauseum, to make sure that we have the most robust solution when we wrap up.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I'm not to speak for you, but I encourage you to talk to Mo about about that setup and how they're approaching it, because I think that's a really interesting and smart data-driven approach. Okay, we're going to shift the conversation a little bit into obviously a big component of this conference and this organization is the communication solution to support next-gen ANI. And you all touched on it a little bit. I'll start with John, since you're in a unique position compared to them. Like you said, it's a little bit chicken and an egg, for you with your desire to deploy these meters as part of the funding, but not yet all the way there on the PLTE decision. So like, what are you gonna do? Like, where are you at? Like, talk through where you're at in that chicken and egg scenario, just to kind of show a perspective of where a different perspective than what Mo and Ron will talk about.
Yeah, so, it's I believe, an unenviable position to be in, to be looking at AMI systems right now. It's a classic convergence of long cycle industrial technology meeting consumer demand-driven technology change. That's usually not a good recipe for being able to manage it. And we all know, if you have, in our case, 620,000 meters, you don't like touching them physically very often. So, from a standpoint of where we're at, I think, and I say this because it's literally evolving. I mean, last week I got some more education, so my position on this is evolving, I think, as much as the industry is evolving. But I see the ultimate solution being a hybrid approach. Certainly, we know that meters, and I don't even know if they should be called meters anymore. It's getting to the point where grid edge intelligent devices that, oh, by the way, happen to do billing determinants. Seems to be, that's a little wordy, so I don't think we'll use that. But at the end of the day, they're going to need to be able to do a lot of different things. Certainly the waveform data, even in the best case scenario, I heard 16 kilohertz sampling. I think one of the vendors is going to 32. We're talking about over multiple channels. It's terabytes of data a day, literally, you could be pulling off of a meter when you get down to that. So you're certainly not going to backhaul all of that, even with the most robust PLT, but you will get bits and pieces. And I think the intelligence needs to be at the meter to do that kind of parsing, finding stuff that's really interesting, getting it up for deeper analysis so that we can use large language models, build off the analytics and produce essentially profiles that go back down the meters and help do that. But that doesn't solve all the problems either, right? That's part of a process. But then there's the real time. There's the stuff that needs to work at the local level and probably isn't going to be able to be supported even backhauling to a centralized decision making. So I also believe that having peer-to-peer communications, having kind of this, village approach to meters forming self networks around the transformers they belong to. There's value in that, value in them communicating. And then the last piece of this, obviously, is where do we go with like FERC 2222, control and communications outside of the actual utility to the customer and back and forth. So talking to EVs, talking to solar, battery. Look, there are multiple ways to attack that problem. At least in Pennsylvania, it has not been solved. I don't think many places it has. But I do want to have the capability to be able to facilitate that communication directly from that gateway, which is now the meter, right? So whether it be 2030.5 or some kind of other solution for local communications, that's also weighing heavily into this. So I hate to say it, it's kind of bring all technologies to bear. And then, PLTE is great because it's going to allow us to have, to Mo's point, a very open standards-based way to communicate to those meters for all the stuff that you want to send to your DERMS or communicate with your back office and back and forth, downloading new programs, et cetera. That's just wonderful. But for us, anyhow, at least where I think we're headed is to try to find something that kind of brings all of those capabilities to the table to allow us to really identify and address known use cases and hopefully, and again, no guarantees, but hopefully be positioned for what we don't necessarily know today, but we'll certainly have to deal with tomorrow.
Thanks for that. I want to shift to Ron a little bit. You mentioned your getting to that customer edge philosophy, and as we at Burns McDonnell have partnered with utilities to kind of help make the private LTE decision, we've kind of commonly see this investment versus benefit curve when we're talking about building infrastructure to build out and get the coverage to your service territory. So when we talk meters and we talk to this next gen AMI, you're not just talking about using existing towers and poles and tall assets to get to 80% of your territory and kind of moving use cases over to PLT. That we're talking, this is effectively 100% of your service territory, and there would be a cost to build a PLTE network to be able to use that network to reach every meter, which I think leads to what I really want to ask you about, that blending of all the success you've had with your existing mesh and how you, for your electric customers, how you plan to use that and use PLT maybe as a fat pipe, to backhaul that, and how that may be different than your gas network. So I wanted you to talk a little bit to the audience about if it was cost related that led you to that decision, if it was the success of the mesh network you were having, to provide that perspective of the RF considerations and the build out and infrastructure considerations that led you to how you're going to handle the communications for this.
Right. Well, early on, it was actually our PLTE journey that kind of started this about 4 years ago when we started looking at at a way to, an efficient way to backhaul the meter traffic that would be coming back. And so we knew that it would be cost prohibitive to build fiber to every access point. There's just no way you can do that, right? Every relay, every access point, it just is unsustainable, it's unrealistic. So we had to come up with an efficient way to aggregate that traffic, to bring it back into the head end so that it could be deciphered in a meaningful way. And as much as we would love to run fiber to every single meter and every single house, that's just not feasible. So we started doing some testing, and we started to figure out that really quickly that PLTE would be a great middle mile solution. So we have fiber. We have fiber networks that are fast and efficient around all of our service territories, but they don't go to every point. And so if you have a very efficient, well-engineered wireless network, and at that point in time, it could have been PLTE or it could have been something else. But if you have that in place, you're able to aggregate that back, and you save millions, maybe hundreds of millions, just in infrastructure costs that are unnecessary, because you have that even wireless coverage to grab those access points that are actually working in that neighborhood area network. They call those NANs. You actually are aggregating that traffic, and all of that overhead traffic is not a part of that big capture, right? So that makes you way more efficient. It's just going on in between the meters themselves, whether you're using power line carrier or RF solution between each individual house and each individual meter. Not only that, there's also coverage issues, right? That you get shading from houses being close together, and maybe meters being between houses and being shielded from that RF. That mesh network was so effective and so efficient at taking care of that day-to-day traffic that the real traffic, the real control traffic, could be aggregated more efficiently through the access points and then brought back over private LTE. We even looked at it with WiMAX too before that actually, we had to abandon that due to FCC rulings, but we found that PLTE was just such a great choice for that middle mile application that it just made everything more efficient. So that, and to boil it down, that was all the use cases, right? That was every use case that we had out there, whether it's just reading the meter, whether it's behind the meter, whether it's EV charging or whatever, that is very efficient, very effective.
Great. Mo, where are you guys on this spectrum of the communication solution to talk to these next-gen meters when you're ready to deploy them? Are you still contemplating that? Have you solved that for that yet?
So at SCE, I think, and I know some of our comms guys are out here, but private LTE is, I think, the way we're going to go. From an AMI perspective, we're having internal discussions right now about whether or not it's a hybrid approach or not. Are we going to leave some mesh behind, right? And so I think we have to test and see once we start, field testing a lot of our meters to see what works properly. But I think private LTE is probably going to be the way to go in the future. And, you got to think about 20 years down the line here, right? And we've already started rolling out, private LTE.
That's right.
In our territory. So I think we're gonna leverage some of that because it was definitely costly.
Awesome. So we got 12 minutes left, and please line up for questions. I'm not going to call on you quite yet because I have a couple other things I got, but I want you guys to be ready whenever we shift to that. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you, after hearing from the regulators and talking about use cases, which is the parlance for convincing internally, that this this solution is part, or private LTE is the communications path, and that AMI is AMI 2.0 is a use case for that. So I wanted you guys to share maybe some wisdom or some advice, or maybe some roadblocks you've had in both convincing, internally, your business partners that this is a use case worth exploring, and private, and how that came into the play in terms of selling maybe internally private LTE, or how that came into play when talking with the regulators. So I don't know if any of you have a specific story to tell there.
I don't know, speak in general terms, California is fairly progressive in this space. A couple weeks ago, I was in San Francisco and ran across one of our regulators, or commissioners, I should say. And they are very fond of new technologies, right? And so that gives you an indication around when we go and ask for dollars. I think they're going to be amenable to giving us those dollars for whatever, for what we want to do. I think it's really important that we craft a really compelling story for our customers. One thing that may have been missing in what some of the regulators were saying, in my opinion, was that we need to make sure that customer education is really important, right? So not only planting the seed with our commissioners about what we want to do, but I have a customer experience background, right? And so I think it's really important to get marketing materials out there, get education for our customers out there around what AMI 2.0, Next Gen AMI, whatever we're calling it, really is. It's really important that we do that, because if I'm asking you to pay an extra $5 or $10 on your bill every month, you need to know why, right, and what you're getting for that. And so I think that's really, really important. And I think, you know, as we go and craft our narrative for our regulators, that's something that will be top of mind for us, because it's all about the customer at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yep, I agree with that. And that really resonates with me and kind of our story and how we decided to leverage PLTE as an aid to our mesh network, which was already highly successful. Our leadership was, they're 100% behind it. It was a good success story for Xcel Energy. But you brought up a really good point about education. A part of our journey was the fact that we not only had to educate our internal business units, but also our leadership. It took a long time to help them understand, not a long time, but it took a while to help them understand all the nuances to PLTE and why we wanted to choose that over any other technology. Why couldn't we just, why couldn't we use our Al-Ahmar system to do this? Why couldn't we use, walkie-talkies from Walmart? They didn't know. They were wanting that information, right? So it took some time to kind of break that down and help bring them along with us during that journey. And then also, you brought up a really good point. If we're asking a customer to spend anywhere from 5 cents to $5 more a month on their power bill, what are they getting for that? What are we bringing to the table as your utility provider? What are we doing to give you something for what you're paying for? And I think that's been key to the success that we've seen with our regulators and with our leadership and customer bases, is the fact that we have to educate them on why this is important, making sure that we keep the lights on, but also making sure that we're more secure. For us, selling that point a lot of it was more about security and control, making sure that we maintain control of the grid and making sure that it's secure from bad actors. We're reducing those vectors that they can access our network, and we're making sure that we're really hard to break into, and I think that's a big key point to selling this.
Yeah, for us, I think I'll say the good news is PLTE is a foundational technology for so many use cases within the utility and so many value propositions. Bad news is it's a foundational technology that is underpinning all those use cases and whatnot, because at the end of the day, people can grasp very specific salient issues and points. And when you come at them, and we're dealing with the internal cell right now, and say, I got this great solution, it can solve all the world's problems, at least as it relates to a utility. But it's many multi-millions of dollars. And there are right now alternatives that you could utilize, some good, some not so good. You now kind of have to bring together the whole entire village, right? You got to go across multiple departments. Certainly they understand the AMI upgrade cycle. We've lived it. Everybody's kind of accepted that you're going to be doing technological refreshes there. But PLT is new, right? At least for us, we're not a particularly comms-driven company. We tended to lean towards public and let someone else worry about those issues. So you're truly trying to sell them on the fact that it's an investment that is really going to bear fruit for a long period of time, but it takes a commitment up front to do. And that has been and continues to be our struggle to bring all those departments together. We have good support in pieces and parts, but we still today, I don't think have the holistic support, someone, you know, that's saying this is no longer just a cost-benefit assessment, but this is a strategic imperative. We're trying to make that bridge to make this a lot more of a certain thing.
Right. Well, great perspective from everybody up here. Looks like we've got a couple of questions. We've got about 6 minutes left, so we'll take one or two, depending on how many are up there, and then maybe if we have time, land on a parting thought from each of you, but we'll see how time goes. Go ahead.
Hi, so my quick question, I came from a power utility before coming to Nokia, and it was 10 years to roll out AMI, and I was in charge of that last 20% from a network perspective. So do we have time to wait for these use cases to look at these refresh cycles taking 10 years? And that was with a mesh network. So now we're talking about private LTE on top of new meters. So I'd just like your opinion on how long do you think it will take to deploy these new meter networks?
Yeah, so you pretty much summed up the problem in a very short sentence. Thank you. It is true. And this is, I think I mentioned it briefly, it's the convergence of two types of life cycles around technology. You know, if you go back 3 years ago, we did not really have mostly a construct of this new life cycle. It's driven from the outside in. You know, people were buying EVs, they're putting solar in, they're putting batteries in with or without us, right? So everything we're doing is in response to outside stimuli. We're not controlling the life cycle anymore, right? Or else we would still be on our plan to wait another 3, 4, 5 years and then start looking at an AMI replacement for technical obsolescence and roll that out over 4 years and then rinse and repeat, right? Go life cycle and do that again. The world has interjected into our best laid plans and said, nope, you're going to have to really start thinking about this in a totally different way. I wish I had a great answer, because at the end of the day, I kind of call it a physics problem here. You got 600,000 in our case, or however many millions you have at your utility, you can't totally make them software defined. Like if I could make a meter all software, it'd be a wonderful world, right? You could just make it change to do whatever you want to do. But they have COM boards and RF stuff and batteries and memory and CPU. And at some point, you can only pre-divine all that stuff into the current tech to try to be prepared for something you may not even have a vision of yet. So you're right, it is the biggest challenge in my opinion, which is why I said I think it's an unenviable place to be, trying to decide on what your next gen AMI is right now, because there's a lot of unknowns.
So I'm going to ask one follow-on question. We talked a little bit about customer acceptance and what do they get for the money we're asking them to pay extra. Can anyone in this room, and this is a bit of a provocative question, I've lived in 2 countries in the last 7 years and seen smart meter rollouts in both places. I have yet to see it be worthwhile for the consumer. There's a lot of hype about it, and I don't think it delivered on all the promises that we were giving to these consumers. That's just my personal opinion and experience and observation. And do these consumers, are they willing to turn on the home area network to allow the utility to control things in their home for things like flexibility and their inverter and their EV charger?
I think that last piece was very controversial around control. I don't know if you want me to control your microwave or not. Or your washing machine. So we're having debates about that internally also, right? Like how much do we control? But I think it goes back to my earlier point around education. What are you actually getting? And I don't know if in the countries that you've lived in or where smart meters were deployed, whether or not education was there and it was at a 3rd grade level for you to understand what you're getting from AMI 2.0 or smart meters, right? I think that's what we need to get. And until we do that, you're going to be confused about why you're paying, in my opinion, the extra money.
Do you have any other? Oh, yeah, we have another question coming. Yeah, we got time for one more. Yep.
Okay, so 11 terabytes, or terabytes we were hearing per meter per day. It's a lot of information that allows the utility to see what's going on. Now we look behind the meter. There's a lot of data that maybe the homeowner, the ratepayer, can leverage. Who owns this data? Is it the utility or is it the homeowner, the user? What other uses are there as well?
I don't know. My take would be the utility would own
owns it, yeah.
a lot of that data, right? So that we can provide insights to the customer.
Correct. But
Yeah.
there's also third And you look at home
You have
security, you
aggregators.
look at everybody else, the HOA, others that may create a better neighborhood with that type of information. I guess where's the boundary with what the utility can do with that information?
Yeah, I don't know. You guys want to?
I mean, it's a great question because I think we're going to be grappling with this because, you know, there's green plug and all the stuff that's come up, right? I'm sure that's one. In sharing the data, I certainly think there's a certain amount of responsibility that the utility has to be able to use this data to protect the grid, make it resilient, supportive, and I think all of our customers will support having the ability to turn on their light switch and it actually work, right? So this is what this is about. So I think that means that I agree with Mo. I think the data predominantly is the utilities data. I don't see a problem with sharing it with the customer as long as there's guardrails on that. I mean, only the customer. And I think we do need to be, me speaking personally, need to be stewards. So I don't, of that data, I know there's a lot of opportunities, and I'm sure, you know, the various companies out there. I know why Elon Musk came immediately to my mind, but there's a lot of people who would love to get a hold of this data, right? And utilities could monetize that, certainly, but I don't see that ever happening. I think we're way too governed, and I think we have that obligation to protect that data, so I hope we never have to worry about making those kind of decisions.
I have a question just to add to what you just said. You may not have that motive in mind, but when people install Nest or utilities are endorsing Nest, they're allowing Google to come in and collect that data and monetize that data anyways. And if the consumer's controlling their utilities and appliances and all these IoT devices through their smartphone, that data is already being collected by companies like Google or any other app developer, including those from China, that they may be using to collect that data. So the data is monetized and big tech knows how to get into it, and they're getting into it through the apps. Is there any oversight on the utility side to see how the consumer is being exploited by these developers of these smart home IoT products and services?
Yeah, as a smart home devotee, I'm trying to put one in right now for a new house, and I'll tell you, yeah, it's legit. I mean, that's absolutely happening, and you have to sign away your life if you want to use Google Nest. I mean, you don't really have an option to kind of go off grid with it. So, but I would say this: if the users want to do that, it's kind of buyer beware. I think we can't really, you know, tell them no, that you shouldn't do this. It's not in your best interest. I don't think we should. I think to your point, it's different if we're providing that device to them, right? I certainly don't want us in that scenario creating that problem, but I think they're going to have to make those educated decisions. But I certainly don't want to. I don't want to enable that through our own actions. That would be my perspective.
Go ahead. Get one comment? Nope. Okay. I'm trying to like putting on my MC hat, taking off my panelist hat here, but I got to keep us on time so we can close this out. Give a round of applause for the panelists. Thank you for the questions for everybody. And we're gonna move into our next session as we see you guys off the stage. Thank you so much.